One of the things that I hear a lot from people on Taro or just engineers in general is there's a lot of luck involved with DSA interviews. You're a humble guy, I can tell, Alvin. I want you to put aside the humility for a minute.
Yes.
If you went and tomorrow or next week you did 100 interviews at FANG, Google, Facebook type companies, I am curious, what would your pass rate be? Like, would you kind of fly through them and pass every single one? Or do you think like even someone like you who clearly has a deep mastery on the topic, would you still end up failing a couple of the interviews?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think luck is definitely a component of it. And to me, like, how does that luck formula come about? Well, it's some function of, the topics that you've studied before, right? And also the problems that you practice and what they're going to give you. For example, I'm very opinionated on how to prepare for these interviews, right? So like there are things that even when I am looking for a job, I will not study because I know that there are certain topics like red black trees that like if they give that on an interview, I'm okay with failing that because I'm not going to spend a week learning this and how to implement it because it's a lot of code. It's also kind of unreasonable to ask in like a 45-minute session. So I go into my interviews knowing that there are some problems on Leetcode, because there are a lot of esoteric problems on Leetcode that I have no interest in solving. And if I get those, it's all good, right? But luckily that kind of luck factor could be balanced out by the fact that usually you're given multiple rounds, right? Even in my own like Google interview set, even when I got the job, right, down in 2021, there was like one session where I myself felt like this was probably going to be a no. Like the most I could probably get is a neutral. Definitely not a positive performance. Definitely not a strong hire, right? So I think if I took like 100 interviews to answer your question, maybe like 20 of them might be like no pass, like 10 to 20 of them. But
Wow.
the more you interview, like the better you'll be at them. The better you'll be at them.
I think one of the really strong themes I'm taking away from here is very much the 80-20 rule. Like literally you just said it.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you have
I
very
actually
clear
did.
math. Yeah, I mean, you know these concepts super well.
Yeah.
You're optimizing for the 80% of like, hey, these are like the most common concepts that are being talked about in an interview. And even the 5 core ideas that you sent me ahead of time, that's very much abiding by the 80-20 rule. And I think that's such a good way to study and avoid getting overwhelmed by the whole infinite universe of possible algorithm questions you might get asked.
Exactly. Yeah. And I, just to speak on, we kind of already brought it up in its formal sense, but for folks that aren't familiar with like the 80-20 rule, it's kind of like a classic principle that comes up in science as well as like economics where, 20% of the inputs will give you 80% of the output. So what we're saying is like a very small minority of the things that you can study will give you a lot of your result. So maybe you should get really damn good at that 20%. For one, it will not take you as much time. And two, you'll get most of your result from that. I'm a strong believer of it, right? When you're trying to get into a FANG company, you're not trying to get a PhD in algorithms, right? You're trying to get the job.